Thanks so much for joining us here on Atlanta News First Plus. I'm Joy Lim-Nakron. The major story that we've been covering today involves a cold case. Today marks 10 years since the killing of Patrick Cotrona, and it really rocked the Metro Atlanta community. Here's his image. So Atlanta police are really hoping that the public can help in solving this cold case once and for all. It's gained so much public interest. Police not giving up here. The original homicide detective on this case has spoken out, he and others reminding the public there's still a $25,000 reward in this case. Some of you might remember 33-year-old Patrick Cotrona was shot and killed in East Atlanta during a robbery as he and two friends were walking from his home to a nearby pub. And in the weeks that followed, detectives released sketches of two suspects in the case, but they had really little else to go on other than some bullet shell casings and a description of a car, which was either a Dodge Stratus or a Dodge Intrepid. They do believe that the same assailants robbed other people earlier that very same night. Years later, the detective in the case said that he had exhausted all leads, and that was despite the victim's family putting up a billboard with that $25,000 reward. Certainly it's something that has caused so much pain for this family. But I want to bring in today a special guest joining us, who is, of course, a specialist in the area of criminal law. This is attorney Rachel Kaufman joining us here live in studio. Rachel, in your experience, thanks so much for being with us. In your experience, what is the likelihood now of getting this resolved 10 years later?
I think it's incredibly unlikely, which is why they're trying to bring more media interest to it to see if people can look at the sketches and possibly recognize someone. Those sketches kind of look like everybody I see in Atlanta, so I don't know if that's going to be enough. Possibly somebody has confessed and maybe somebody knows who did it, so maybe they're hoping that 10 years later they're going to be able to, put a name to a face of somebody who's accused of killing Mr. Cotrona. So is it likely that they're going to find the guy? Probably not at this point, but they are hoping to renew some interest in the case.
How important are tips from the public in solving crimes like this?
They're incredibly important and helpful. So over time, relationships change. So like I was saying before, possibly whoever did this told a girlfriend, and that girlfriend's his ex-girlfriend now. And she may have a bone to pick with him and come out with that kind of information years later. That's the kind of thing that they're hoping for. I mean, tip-wise, people aren't going to remember, the specifics of exactly where they were 10 years ago. But if they do know who did this, and they're no longer friends with them, or they have their own case, maybe they have information when they get arrested that they would try to exchange for leniency in their own sentence.
And so that's the sort of thing that investigators, I guess, would be banking on and trying to get some leads here. What else do you think that needs to happen for this investigation or for this case to finally be cracked?
So Detective DeMeester, I've personally handled cases against him. He is a thorough investigator. I imagine that he's looked through all of the surveillance footage. He's big on cell phone triangulation and all of that, so I'm sure all of that's been looked at. At this point, I just think that they're hoping that somebody who knows what happened is going to come forward and need the money.
Yeah. Well, certainly we are hoping for the sake of his family that this does lead to some answers and potentially justice being served here. Another story that we have unfortunately been following very closely over the last few days, a spree of officer-involved shootings, all in the span of 24 hours, several of them. So GBI is investigating in 4 different counties, Bibb, Polk, Newton, and Fulton counties. The shooting in Fulton County left a man injured after a chase and a shootout with Georgia State Troopers. That all came to a head on Boulevard in southeast Atlanta yesterday. According to the GBI, 36-year-old Ramadan Salim refused to pull over after officers say that he was driving erratically on I-20 East. He reportedly drove off the interstate, ran a red light, slammed into a car right before crashing into a utility pole. When state troopers attempted to make contact with him, he allegedly shot at troopers. They fired back, then wounding the driver. Rachel, what is your take on this?
Where do I begin? My take on this, just looking at the vehicle that had hit the pole, is that there were bullet holes through the back windows of that vehicle. That would tell me that those vehicle windows were up at the time that shots went into the vehicle. When it comes to like car chases and stuff like that, too often it seems as though police, knowing that they have the authority to pull somebody over and engage in these kind of chases, instead of de-escalating the situation, it clearly tends to escalate. A lot of other people could have been injured. So, overall, I wish that there were, if they're just chasing him for driving erratically on the freeway and then it turns into this, I just wish that there could be, a better way to handle ourselves without guns, because, look what happens. I'm glad no one's dead. I believe that there had been a child in one of the cars, if I remember correctly. At least a child and a baby. So it's just, it'd be nice if they could handle themselves with a little bit more peace and safety at interest, because a lot of lives were put at risk by this. I don't know if he ran through a red light or what, but yeah, look at that window. Got blown out. I don't think that somebody shot out of the car through that window. They would just put it down. So
the damage is definitely it's significant, and when you think about these chases as well that are accompanying some of these shootings, it definitely could be a hazard to other individuals as well. I know you're a criminal defense attorney, and so you go up against police and prosecutors in the work that you do. But what do you advise your clients if they're ever in situations where they are being, confronted they're in a confrontation with an officer, or there's a chase?
Well, you're never going to win. So the best thing to do is to say nothing and comply, and we'll handle it later. Because honestly, if you want to drag the police on a car chase, they will get all of their other police officer friends, and they're all coming for you, whatever it takes. Clearly willing to shoot through windows, among other things. Things get out of control. So yeah, comply, and we'll deal with it later.
Okay.
That's my advice.
Okay. I want to ask you about another story that we've been following, and this involves a former attorney who is now convicted of murder. This is something that, certainly stunned a lot of people. This former Georgia attorney, Richard Merritt, he's been found guilty on all the charges. He's been sentenced to life in prison for the 2019 murder of his own mother. After more than an hour of deliberation, which is really not that much time, a DeKalb County jury found him guilty on all the counts. That includes malice murder, felony murder, aggravated assault, possession of a knife during the commission of a felony. He first made headlines in 2019 after pleading guilty to defrauding several of his clients during his time as an attorney. And after he was sentenced to 15 years, he failed to turn himself in. Authorities say he cut off his ankle monitor, he stabbed his mother to death, and then took off in her SUV, prompting a nationwide manhunt that lasted 8 months. A judge, again, sentenced him to life without parole plus 5 years on top of that. Rachel, what's your take?
Well, my take was back in 2017 when he was convicted of defrauding his clients. It seems like once he found out that he was going to get 15 years in prison, the issue came when the judge allowed him to get his affairs in order and report to the Cobb County Jail at a later date. And I think nobody wants to go to jail. Nobody wants to turn themselves in for 15 years. And so I think what ended up happening is he panicked and chose to brutally kill his mother. It's like a slow nosedive in his life. I think that after the 2017 case, he could have done 15 years or been paroled out and moved forward with his life. But it seems that he was headed down a really negative path since 2017, and it's a little disturbing that a jury took less than an hour to find him guilty, because it's important that they deliberate as to the facts and make sure that the burden has been proven. However, this guy did himself no favors.
So it's really interesting to note that he was convicted on 2 sort of murder charges, because it's not just malice murder, but felony murder. So I wanted to just kind of pick your brain a little bit on what the difference is and what it signifies, the fact that the jury convicted him on both.
So basically, for the purposes of, I guess there's like first degree murder, second degree murder. In Georgia, we have malice murder, and then like a step below that, in theory, would be felony murder. I mean, you're committing a forcible felony, and somebody dies during it. The fact that they found him guilty of all of those things means that basically that they felt that he acted with malice at the time, so more like a first degree murder. But they also, based on that, he also did everything else as well. So I think they found him guilty that way. What is interesting that most jurors don't know is that felony murder in Georgia and malice murder share the same sentencing range, which is either life with, life without parole, possibly the death penalty. So there's really no distinction when it comes to, like, if they were just to have found him guilty of felony murder, he still would get life without parole in prison, likely. So, it doesn't really matter, but it's clear that the jury spoke that they actually felt this was like a first degree murder situation and not just a felony where somebody died, that he intended to kill her with malice.
Yeah, and I mean, we would assume that he would appeal this. Would that be correct?
That's the next step. That's really all he can do at this point.
Yeah, especially being an attorney, he knows that.
Yeah, my understanding is that at the sentencing, he did mention that it was his greed that led to all of this. So I don't know if he's admitting to it, how that would work for the purposes of an appeal.
Okay.
But there could have been errors throughout the trial. Possibly he'll get a retrial. But if he's saying that he basically did it because of greed, I don't know how you go back and say you didn't do it now.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah.
So fair point. Any final thoughts before we let you go?
Any final thoughts? Oh, well, should I?
Yes.
Okay, so my final thoughts, given all these police-involved shootings, are that as it relates to Cop City, I have something to say. Just the idea that we don't need a $90 million, however much money it is, facility so that police can train themselves on how to shoot better, since they don't seem to have a problem shooting at all. Maybe we need like a mental health facility in that space for people like Miss Greer from Northern Georgia, who, when people are having mental health issues, they don't need to be handled by police who are trained to kind of take people down and by whatever means necessary. A lot of these people have mental health issues, and they need to be dealt with mental health hands.
And certainly, not many people would disagree with you, but many people would agree with you. So appreciate you sharing your views. Attorney Rachel Kaufman joining us for some live analysis here on Atlanta News First Plus. We really appreciate you joining us and sharing your expertise, and we really appreciate our viewers being with us as well. We're going to keep you up to date with all the latest.